right, well, I think we're ready to kick things off. I just wanted to quickly say good evening and welcome everyone. It's so nice to see some new faces, some friendly faces. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Kara. I'm the director for Tech in Motion, which is our tech community created by Motion Recruitment that brings together more than 350,000 tech professionals through events like this across North America. Before we get started, just wanted to quickly thank you all for joining us tonight, for braving the rain here, and give a special thank you to our hosts at Microsoft, our presenting partner, Vita Global Sciences, our colleagues across Kelly Science and Clinical, and of course our incredible panelists here for taking the time to share their expertise with us. At Tech in Motion, our mission has always been simple: bring people together around the technologies that are changing the way we live and work. Over the years, for us, that has meant conversations around AI, cybersecurity, cloud, software development, digital transformation. But increasingly, as you all are seeing, the most exciting innovation isn't just happening in one industry. It's happening where all of our industries intersect. And that's exactly what tonight is about. As you all, I'm sure, agree, Boston is uniquely positioned at the crossroads of technology and life sciences, making it the perfect place for us to explore how AI is transforming clinical research. As organizations look to accelerate innovation, improve trial outcomes, and bring therapies to patients faster, success increasingly depends on our collaboration between technologists, scientists, clinicians, and data leaders.
And that's also why this event is such a meaningful partnership. Hi everyone, I'm Hannah Jennings, and I help Kara put on events like these. Really excited to welcome you all here tonight. Across our Kelly family of companies, including Motion Recruitment, Kelly Science and Clinical, Vita Global Sciences, we bring together a unique expertise to different parts of the innovation ecosystem. Tonight is an opportunity to bring those perspectives together, creating connections and conversations that help advance both technology and science. Whether you're joining us from biotech, pharma, clinical research, technology, consulting, or you're simply just curious about where AI is taking the industry, we hope you'll leave tonight with some new ideas, connections, and maybe even a new future collaborator. With that, I would like to introduce you to our presenting partner for the evening, Vita Global Sciences. Please join me in welcoming their founder and president, Tim Southwick.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you all for attending. This is really exciting. Tech in Motion has been a partner with our team throughout Kelly and with VGS. What's exciting is this is the first opportunity we've had to introduce life sciences to this mix, and more importantly, AI as it relates to it. When I think about who we are, we're a company that's involved in research and development and consulting resources. We really look at the patient. We all look at data in the same way you all do too. So for us, the importance of AI is also not just the AI, the tool itself, it's the science behind it. I think for most of us, we look at AI as maybe a magic bullet. It's not. It's a way for us to look at the mundane and take away some of the tasks that potentially we all have a task in our day-to-day that we don't like doing, right? So there's an opportunity for us to leverage that tool. But at the end of the day, science and patients. Patients first, science second, for sure. The opportunity today not only presents itself from a technology and AI aspect, but when I think about the quality of the data, think about the trials that we're running, think about the patients that we're supporting and helping get from start to finish, from research development, from the bench, all the way through submission. The tool is important to us in terms of how we can take advantage, how we can leverage the technology ultimately for our patients. I think about so many years ago when I thought about COVID, I said, geez, I've been in the space for so long, how can they going to get something through in that fast? Think about the amount of data that we get on a day-to-day basis in these trials and being able to leverage all these tools and these aspects ultimately to help the patients and move the clinical trial forward. When I think about the responsibility, I go back to the idea that, again, it's science related. It's a tool, but the science has to be in play here. Early days, it could change over time, but right now we're talking about analysis, not necessarily submission. And I think people are starting to look at different ways to use and utilize the tool. And that'll really dictate as we move forward with regulatory bodies. Today's goal is really just have fun, ask questions, be curious. There's a tremendous amount of talent in the room here. It may not be let's hope it's the panel, but it may not just be the panel, but it could be a conversation over a cookie or a coffee that you can learn about in terms of who your partners are and potentially what they're doing. Ironically, the companies we work with, no matter the size, a lot of folks are still struggling with how am I going to use AI as a technology and a strategy. And again, regardless of size, small, mids, and larges, some companies have a strategy around it. Some people know that they know they have to be in it. They're just not really sure what to do when they get there. So again, I'm glad you're all here and take advantage of the group here today. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce my partner in crime here, Josh Samuels. Have fun, ask questions, be curious, and take advantage of all the brains here in this room. So again, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Kara. Welcome. It's great to see this room full. We have an awesome panel discussion. Obviously, this is one of the big hot topic issues in really all industries, but how it's going to work for us within biotech and pharma. I'm really excited to get this started. My name is Josh Samuels. I'm the VP of FSP Solutions at Vita Global Sciences. I've been with the group for about 10 years. We're just proud to be involved in these types of discussions, and we're really excited to get started. So we're going to get this started with this great panel, and I'm going to turn it over to them. We're going to start by having each of our panel members introduce themselves, and then we're going to start with just a question. We've all heard how AI has become really one of the biggest buzzwords in healthcare. What each of these panelists is going to say after they introduce themselves is just what is one misconception or something that you guys wish that everybody understood about how AI is actually being applied in clinical research today. So without further ado, let's start right here closest to me, and we'll get this underway.
Sounds great. Thanks, Josh. Thanks to the Vita and Tech Motion team for organizing an amazing event. I'm looking forward to the conversation, guys. I think we're going to have to bring the energy to offset this gloomy day. My name is Vish. I'm co-founder and CEO of Century Health. My background is I've been building software in healthcare and life sciences for about a decade, worked at companies like BCG and Evidation. And at Century, what we do is we build AI-powered patient registries. So what that means is we work with a network of specialty providers across the US, about 200 sites. And we take in data that's collected from routine care, and it can be quite messy at its source, and make it usable for research. And really the unlock is that so much of that data, 80% of it, is unstructured. It's documents, it's notes. And we have an AI platform that processes that and clinically reasons with that data to make it usable for downstream analysis. I guess to answer the icebreaker, I think, from my standpoint, the misconception about AI is that the hard part is training the model or building the AI models. I think the hard part is the validation. So in life sciences, if you're trusting AI to do mission critical tasks, how can you trust it to do that at scale and for it to be a white box versus a black box?
Hi everyone, I'm Sanjiv Ramalingam. My background is actually in biomedical engineering and electrical engineering. So I used to build biphasic circuits to actually pace the heart, and then analyzing biosignals led me to data analysis and then statistical programming. And then now I lead a team at Biogen. So we standardize all of Biogen's clinical trial data before it's ready for analysis. So going back to the question, I think most of my answers are going to or responses are going to be based because all the work I and my team does is in a GXP environment. And so I think there's more rigor in terms of whenever you use AI in a GXP framework. So I think the myth is that you can throw something into AI and then you can the answers are reliable. You can throw anything at it. You can throw an LLM at anything. But I think the truth is there's a lot of rigor that needs to go, and you need to have define the scope. It's also a multidisciplinary effort, and many other factors. So,
Thank you, Sanjiv. I'm Sreekanth Gudapati. I work for eClinical Solutions. We deliver elluminate, which is a
data intelligence platform evolved from a clinical data repository over the last decade. I had professional services there, so my lens today, like with the rest of the panel, would be to share what we are seeing from the customers, what their expectations are from about AI, how it's going to solve the problems, and some examples with real life use cases that are measurable and generating value for our customers. Coming back to the icebreaker question, so what I have seen like from solving our customer problems is with the evolution of the AI models, like everyone's perspective walking into it or doing a pilot is you have an AI tool that's going to solve all the problems. As Sanjiv was saying, like, but it ties into it, but a different lens. So your AI algorithm or the insights it's going to provide are only as good as the data that's underlying. So you need a unified model, particularly for clinical research. You cannot build an AI algorithm or provide an AI insight in silo. If I may, if I have to link an example to it, you cannot look at vendor lab data in silo and like provide an insight. It has to be looked at based off the EDC data that's captured, whether it's demographics or gender or the drug dosing. So all that has to come together, and you could use tools to tie all that information together for faster insights.
Hi everyone, my name is Shelby Abel and I am the Senior Director of Data Management at X4 Pharmaceuticals. Excuse me. I've been in data management for over 30 years. So back when there was 3-part NCR paper. So where we are today and thinking about and implementing an AI solution. And I've worked at many companies from Genzyme, Biogen, Alexion, and AstraZeneca through my career. To the icebreaker question, my perspective is that I feel people are forgetting that we need the human expertise, your expertise that you come to the table with to ensure that the model is working for your data. Diabetes trials are completely different than rare disease trials in that patient population, and also when your company may have one specialty area, say rare blood disorders, so you want to be able to build models that's going to support the portfolio and not just looking at an AI model in general and be strategic about it. So I think a lot of that's the human aspect. AI is not going to be able to build it from that aspect.
Awesome. So as everybody here can see, we have a wide swath of the industry, from sponsors to vendors and someone who does a little bit of everything. So we'll get to our first theme here, which is smarter trials through AI and data. And we're really looking to explore how organizations are building stronger clinical data foundations and leveraging machine learning, productive modeling, and real-world data to improve trial design and execution. So our first question for the panel here, we'll start with Shelby, since we're going to talk about data, and she is data management. What are some of the biggest data challenges organizations are still trying to solve?
Believe it or not, data silos and fragmentation because of all of the third-party data that is collected in the protocols, and the protocols are getting larger and larger and having many more data solutions and places where the data is coming from. So I would say combining traditional electronic data capture with all the other data that you collect from the different vendors. And then the next is managing unstructured data volume, like wearables, and that volume of data coming in and applying it with the rest of the data. Like if you think like a patient profile, right? Bringing everything together so you can look at the patient's progress through the study. And so as there's more and more data tools that generate these massive data sets and data that's coming in, I think that's another challenge. I think there are some solutions out there, but I think that's another area. And the other one is around AI governance. And I think a lot of times companies are feeling the pressure to implement an AI tool somewhere, do a pilot, bring it in, instead of thinking, okay, how do we want to use AI and what governance we want to put around that before just jumping in. But I think most companies are doing it very first.
Good point, Shelby. So I might have to say, like, Shelby and I might be thinking like in very similar directions, because most of our user base is data management and middle monitoring. To add to what she shared, earlier example that I gave was how do we unify the data, like bring from different data sources, right? So now what the AI tools that are giving you the capability goes beyond that. It's not structured data. Like, I'll give a quick example of what we are trying to solve. You can throw in a protocol as well as if you have an IDRP or review objective library, like throw that at it as well. So that connects all the data points together. So your data and your endpoints and the review objectives are one fabric now, like trying to solve key decision points and provide insights.
Maybe the only one thing I'll add is what Shelby said. You have to really identify the context of use, and it's a multidisciplinary effort. So to really have a good success, I think it's the person who really knows the business in the sense of end to end, where and how things are connected. I think they are the ones who will actually identify the problem, because you cannot just throw AI at every use case. And so even identifying the right problem to have incorporate AI is a critical, it's a critical thing.
Maybe I'll just build on Sreekanth's point about the hidden value in unstructured data with an example. So we do some work in rare neurology conditions like myasthenia gravis, and there's a whole host of kind of unanswered questions about identifying patients that have MG, and one of the reasons for that is because ICD codes, which are structured data and typically the most accessible, are unreliable to identify MG patients because of how coding works. So a particular database we were looking at had 10x the number of MG patients than one would expect compared to kind of general population level studies. And that's because you put in the ICD code for billing reasons. That doesn't necessarily mean that clinically the patient has GMG. So I just wanted to kind of highlight this as an example of it wouldn't actually be possible to have clinical experts to review all of these notes and documents and pathology reports and labs. But it is something that AI can do as long as you validate it for that particular use case.
Well, and those are all great answers. And going back to picking up on what Sanjiv was talking about, I think the biggest question that we're always asked when we're talking to our clients about what's going on with AI and what other clients are doing are what actual practical AI use cases are already creating measurable value today. We just heard Vish talk about one. What else have you guys seen that is actually working? Like, that seems to be the biggest question that everybody is asking. Like, where is this being applied? And what case studies have you seen that you want to try and use in each of your individual situations?
Sure. I can start off with that. So there are a number of problems that we are trying to solve through our platform. So I'll highlight one. So STTM data generation is like a common use case across the board for all the trials. And we have seen a lot of companies go at it, like how do we find efficiency there, standardize the CRF collection and standardize the programming. So what we are trying to do now, like, is take that to the next level, is use Gen AI to generate specification. Like it's an idea grounded in spec-driven coding, if I may. So Gen AI is going to deliver you the spec where a human gets in the loop, and actually approves, yes, this is a valid spec, this could be used, and the system then using deterministic rules based off that spec generates the code. So by that approach, so there are two things that I want to highlight there. So one is it's a measurable value. You know how much time and effort like your SAS team or any STTM programming team is spending on like spec creation and the programming, and so that can be easily compared to how much time that the system has taken. And also, how are we compliant with this? The key there is the clear separation between what is Gen AI doing and what is human approving versus how is code generated. Its code is still deterministic, which is compliant. So to complete the loop of there is a human along the way approving what's happening, and of course the outputs could be reconciled as well.
So one of the use cases that we've actually almost implemented is about so within metadata, using metadata, it's basically to create like a trial summary domain within like SDTM. So for every clinical trial, we need to submit the metadata of the clinical trial to the regulatory authority. So for that, the main sources of input it's basically the protocol, and then also sometimes we even rely on clinicaltrials.gov. And then so for this, AI is a great use case. One, because then you also work in a GXP environment. I think you want to identify low risk examples and use cases. So I always like to start small, and then maybe then you try to get success and then build on it. So with this use case, since there's no involvement of clinical trial data, and then we put human in the loop in kind of every step of the way. So basically, we built an app that takes the protocol as well as we created a template, a blank template for the trials. So these are the parameters that we want responses for. Basically, what's the primary outcome or secondary exploratory, how many planned subjects, how many arms you need. So then the app basically then retrieves all that information from the protocol. And then so from a programming perspective, rather than starting with a blank slate, so at least right now we have about 30% pre-populated.
Shelby, you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, so for data management, implementing my friends too here. So automating medical data review and CFDR, so cross-functional data review, and query generation and deviations can all be in the same system and feed off the same data, which saves a lot of time and effort, right? So that you can use your expertise to make sure that what AI is providing you is correct and saving time and effort.
And so one last point here on this topic before we go here. So beyond genomic data, what other clinical, operational, or real-world data sources do you guys see becoming increasingly important to building smarter trials?
I can go ahead. So if I wind back kind of when I started my, I've been working in data space like for the last 2 decades. Started my clinical research career a decade ago. So when I started in clinical research, like the primary use case for AI was like how to crack genomic data. So now, like with LLM models and broader use cases, so what we are seeing as a pattern is every data has become important. And when 10 years ago, there weren't as many data sources. Now, like every study that we onboard onto the platform has on an average of 10 different data sources. So So all those data points are becoming critical, whether it's wearables or ECOA or personal dairy. Take any data point. You may not have to get to the granular data, but the summarization of it could be done through AI and unify that with the rest of the EDC data. So to answer to your question, Josh, I see what AI tools have done is make it easier for you to extract value of every single data source and ensure the completeness and accuracy of it.
Just to add on, I think increasingly longitudinal clinical data, especially from underrepresented providers and underrepresented patient populations, I think is more important than ever. I think often, historically, primarily for resource constraints, because it's so difficult to work with large data sets, you often look at a patient as sort of a point in time. But the reality is that point in time is one moment in a journey, a diagnostic journey, a treatment journey. And being able to look at that full view means that you can better model inclusion-exclusion criteria, understand outcomes in the real world. And I think that sort of longitudinal view is now really possible.
All right, great answers. Thank you, guys. Let's move on to our second theme here, which is the future of clinical research and development. And we're going to talk here about how automation, AI, digital platforms are transforming workflows across clinical research and development. So our first question for the panel here is, how are technology, data, and clinical teams collaborating differently than they were just a few years ago? Vish, let's start with you here.
Sure. I think AI is fundamentally blurring the lines between functions. A lot of how we think about building our team at Century is we're looking for folks that are bilingual, meaning you can sort of fluidly think as a clinician or certainly someone with kind of domain expertise and as a technologist. And I'm thinking about, Shelby, your kind of earlier point that human expertise matters. I'd suggest that human expertise matters now more than ever because it's too easy to over-rely on AI. So to maybe make this concrete with how we think about our AI workflows, another example in neurology, we're often looking retrospectively at EHR data to identify important clinical outcomes in multiple sclerosis. It's a heartbreaking disease. There are about 1 million people in the US that have MS, and one of the most important clinical outcomes is whether or not a patient had a relapse. And to identify a relapse in unstructured data is non-trivial. There are a multitude of ways in which it's documented. It could be a probable relapse or a possible relapse, like how do you determine did a relapse occur or not, or you're looking at other aspects of the chart. For example, whether steroids were prescribed to the patient. So how does like the blurring of the functions work, right? In a clinical task like this, we'll bring in a medical expert, a medical director typically, to start with just laying out, what would they normally be doing if they were reading this chart. We take that and then turn that into guidelines for the model to follow. And then the other part of the workflow where human expertise really matters is we validate that model at scale. So we do a head-to-head with human experts doing that labeling and then the model, and if they agree sufficiently, we then run that in production. So hopefully that helps kind of paint a picture of how do these functions come together and how are these lines starting to blur.
And I think that rolls perfectly into a question for our panel members who work at sponsors and have had this experience. Just really, how are organizations, either that you're currently working for or that you have worked for in the past, or that you know people that you're having conversations with, how are you guys balancing that efficiency with the need for the human oversight and the scientific expertise?
I was going to talk more about clinical operations and the cross-functional teams. AI is bringing everyone together because you want a strategic model to use for your studies in your therapeutic area. So ClinOps isn't just having CRAs and going and checking data anymore. It's a holistic approach to collecting the data and validating the data on a risk-based approach. So instead of clinical just being on the outside of data, now they have to be integrated with data so that when they're at the sites and collecting the data, they understand from the perspective of collecting it and feeding it in to your tool what that means from the site's perspective and the different standardizations around that.
Sanjiv, you want to jump in?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add,
Sure.
maybe to your prior question, like how it's forced us to change. Typically, in the biotech pharmaceutical in clinical trials, the flow of data is unidirectional. So you collect data, data management, right? So get raw data through data management, then you standardize it, or you say SDTM, then you basically get it ready for analysis. Then you do it's Adam data sets, and then you create TFLs, right? So it's sort of like a very linear flow. But then now there's a constant need to look at data. So MVs and so forth. So they want to keep looking at almost everyday basis, or even on a much regular basis. So what that has forced us to do is come up with ways. So we are actually, I think, one of the few companies that do that. So we are actually my group now. So we actually provide standardized data back to data management. So kind of change the whole flow, if you will. And so we've been able to add users to the access to standardized data. So raw data gets downloaded every day, SDTMs get refreshed every day, and then that feeds into tools like Illuminate, and then so you have like a visual data analytics dashboard that MDs or other stakeholders can actually review data on a constant basis.
And so along those lines, you guys are now seeing it, and Sreekanth, this could be a question for you to start with, is what are you seeing, how is AI forcing new collaboration models between the different groups and putting people together as far as differently than it has been in the past?
Excellent question. So if I try to draw an example from what we do, have to touch it, give you get some insight into how we operate. So we have multiple functions, like whenever we are delivering a solution to the customer. I'll take the smallest unit possible, if I may, like a visualization of sorts. So it could be driven by a study endpoint requirement. So we have a domain space expert who understands the business need, and a programmer who builds visual. That has been the model that worked for a long time. Now with the tools that we have access to, so these two roles are converging together. And how we see it is, if I have to phrase it, instead of doing a handoff, I wrote a spec, now you take the spec and program. So the prototyping has become faster. So either the VA can prototype, and the complex elements are handed off to the programmer. So it's a continuous collaboration than handoffs. That's the theme that I'm seeing evolving. And that's just one example that I see that span across the delivery. And beyond the tools that we are developing for our customers, we also have built a lot of in-house tools, same theme. Those tools are helping each function to collaborate seamlessly.
So a follow-up question here to all of you, really. At this point, with what you've seen so far, and we know that it's early on and that there's still a lot for everyone to learn about how this is best going to work, what aspects of clinical operations or any part of the drug development life cycle do you think will look fundamentally different in the next 5 years?
There'll be more operational tools. So instead of your traditional ops and data management, there'll be more strategically technology driven, for example, the standards, right? And traditionally, we started with data management, would create the standards, and then the standards for the therapeutic area, but now the cross-functional team creates those therapeutic area standards and works together. And it will transition from just being, transactional, we're just going to check these data, to we're all implementing the AI model that your company decides to implement and be part of the validation through the life cycle.
Maybe I'll add on. I might even kind of tweak the question a little bit with my pragmatic lens. Like what's gonna change next year? I think for me it's two things. One is extracting insight from unstructured data. Can you do a literature review in an hour instead of 2 weeks? Or can you kind of parse through a full protocol and understand what actually matters for any decision you're making? That's number one. And then number two, I might sort of create a broad category of like automating writing, whether it is documentation or code. I think next year there's going to be a whole lot less of that, and you're more sort of monitoring an agent that can write for you and then you review it.
Especially around clinical study reports.
Yeah.
And having that, your first draft, extremely quick so that the experts of the therapeutic area and the study can review that first draft and turn it around much more quickly.
And for me, it really begs the question, then how do you build expertise? If someone early in their career never has to write the document for the first time, how do you know how to review one? I think it's sort of an existential question.
Well, and I can also add that we're hearing from our clients that what we're seeing more than anything else right now is that medical writing is really where AI tools are coming in the fastest, and it's really becoming something that, you know, we're now looking to find people who can work side by side with an AI tool in medical writing to take care of all the tasks that they can do there. So I think that's a good point for us to shift to our third theme here, which is balancing innovation, compliance, and trust. And we want to talk a little bit candidly about governance, transparency, and all the realities of implementing AI in these regulated environments. So the first question here is, how do organizations build confidence in AI-generated insights and recommendations? Sreekanth, we'll start with you here.
Sure, Josh. We have delivered multiple AI-based solutions over the last few years. And if I have to highlight the few grounding principles or foundational principles that helped us get there, I would narrow them down to three. So one is, so it has to be grounded in truth or the facts. So what I mean by that is, so if you're providing an insight, like if your AI model is providing an insight, like I'll pick on the example of data management, you provide some insights based on like what's on the screen, what the data manager is looking at, a visual and a tabular data. Like, so we summarize using an AI model, it's an LLM model, but what it's interpreting is purely constrained to what the user is authorized to see. Blinding is an example. You cannot like open up everything. So user permissions still have to be respected. And also the context, I think Sanjiv talked about context earlier. So the context has to be taken into consideration. Like that study, and I recall Shelby calling out like how different therapeutic areas vary as well, right? So that also ties into it. Like, so context for of that study has to be taken into account, and there has to be traceability as well. So the next foundational principle is explainability versus inspectability. So most of the models that you would see on the market are the solutions. Like if you go outside of clinical research, of course there's some explainability, but for our space, because of compliance and being submission ready and audit ready, we have to. It has to be inspectable. So there has to be enough traceable record of audit of how you produce that insight. What was the underlying facts that were used to produce that insight, and what was the human action taken? Like where is that stored? So that end-to-end traceability. And the third grounding principle that we have used all across our solutions is the human in the loop. This is pervasive mantra, like until maybe in 5 more years, like models will mature so much that we might take human off the loop. But I feel it's a long way out, and we still believe human in the loop is needed, and that's the foundational principle we are following for every solution.
And I was going to go back to human and loop because AI does not know how to handle real life data. So things that really occurred at the site may not make logical sense, like why did the patient not get drug dispensed at that visit? Why is there an unscheduled visit to dispense this dosing? It shouldn't be that way. So even though you have the AI tool, the model, the validation, AI does not understand real life. And when real life data comes in and it doesn't make sense, then the human in the loop still is required to make sense of that data and to follow up.
Yeah. So that's a safeguard, right? And what other safeguards are we going to be able to, have that are most important to get these AI generated insights remaining accurate, transparent, and most importantly, clinically trustworthy, along with traceable? What do you see there?
Continuous monitoring. We still need continuous monitoring of the output to make sure that what you defined is still, again, what you defined and what the AI model should be producing for you. I'm just from a data management perspective, is still producing what it should along. Like say you have a protocol amendment. Did it really take those changes into account and implement them correctly? And just because it's implementing it correctly today doesn't mean 2 months down the road that it doesn't give you something else. So the continuous monitoring of your data in the model that you're using and the governance around that too.
And that's got to be people who have to understand, what to look for and know how to do this, right?
Yes.
If I may add on to it, Josh, like if we tap into the FDA guideline that recently came out, so it touches in the sense like it's a risk-based approach, like your reliability on the model should be proportionate to your risk level, to the consequence of an insight provided. So your guardrails would be around based on that adjusted risk.
Well,
Right, invalidating those risks and still having the trail to show your decision around which risks that you want to take and how you're going to monitor those risks.
And that speaks to the fact that we just had the first FDA warning letter that came out to a company that did not have a validated AI tool in their clinical trial. So speaking to that point of it, making sure that the validation piece is taken care of is another really important factor.
Yeah. They're still promoting risk-based validation, but you still have to have the evidence, your decision, and the evidence that you validated using that risk-based approach.
Are there any other challenges outside of the validation piece and the human element, making sure that we're looking at here?
Still goes back to governance. At least I feel it still goes back to governance. Because again, a lot of these companies are implementing AI without a governance to say, okay, we have these pilots, right? But how are we going to govern apps? Are we governing access? Are we really conducting the forethought for the validation, for all the different pieces of what you're going to implement it for? And that also came out of the FDA guidance.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think kind of a lot of governance needs to solve for transparency and validation in sort of an ongoing, it's not just a one-time decision, it's ongoing as the model performs drifting over time. And I think, when I think about like how do we earn the trust of our customers, it's really transparency.
Mm-hmm.
I think, often we'll have conversations as a team about how do you earn that trust? A lot of these conversations feel like 4 a.m. in a college dorm room. We're like looking at each other and asking like, what is truth? How do you look at what the model is doing and then compare it to ground truth, which may not exist? We do these studies pretty often to report on the accuracy of our model. And we'll have humans, again, kind of clinical experts, do the clinical labeling. It turns out 3 to 5% of the time, the humans disagree with each other. So there's sort of like a ceiling on how accurate a model can be because you don't even have a ground truth, which is completely reliable. So, often what you need to do then is kind of add variable by variable level report F1 scores and provide on the context on why like it was a 95% accuracy, and actually that's gold standard because the humans all disagree 5% of the time.
And that's a perfect bridge to moving on to our next topic, which is where tech and science talent converge. Looking at the growing demand for professionals who can bridge that clinical expertise with the technical innovation. So the first question here is, how do you see roles like clinical data management, statistical programming, biometrics evolving as AI becomes more embedded in day-to-day work? And I'll be honest, an exercise I did one Saturday night at home with my wife, we were using ChatGPT, and we put in all the different functions that our company specializes in and said, what is AI going to do to data management in pharmaceutical industry? What is it going to do to statistical programming, to statisticians, to medical writing? To look to see what the AI actually said about where these things are going. And we were pretty happy to see that the AI told us that all of these functions would still need an element of human beings involved. So it made me feel good that we would continue what we're doing and we can still have these conversations. So with that little anecdote, we'll hand it over to Sanjiv to get your thoughts there.
Sure. I think from the area that I represent, I think the way we code will definitely change. I think the expectations, so for example, in this field, right, so there's an expectation, there's a primary programmer, there's a QC programmer, the amount of time it takes to generate a table or a report. I think the expectations around that in a year will definitely change. And I think we should have more efficient solutions to be able to answer to our management. And then you touched also upon talent. I see also a lot of young, it gives us so much, it gives me also a lot of hope, right? And so we have so much rich talent. I think we should find ways to integrate the talent, and I think co-ops and I think companies and should continue to do that. And an example I'll give is so we had a co-op last year, so we had an AI project. I had an AI project in mind. It was actually this trial summary thing that I gave. It went very well, and so then we were able to hire him full time. So I think it's the more newer college grads, I think will have the more of this knowledge in AI, so we need to find ways to absorb that talent.
And also train them in what they don't know.
So learning curve
Yeah.
for both.
I think for data management, it's going to be more, as I was speaking, AI is going to give you the output, but then reviewing that output, like cross-functional data reviewing, conducting it in an analytic tool so that data managers aren't scheduling meetings and taking notes and all of that. It will turn into everyone does their CFDR review and illuminate, and then they put their findings in illuminate, then AI can take the findings and what domain do those queries go to? Can it be a query generated directly into EDC, or does it need to go back to the group or to the medic, or to, is it a site performance issue? Where does that go in having that quicker, faster review and understanding of the data, and really governing the abnormalities that come out of the data and the trends that, again, that are you wouldn't expect. And also, depending on what model you implement, that data management has a lot more at the table when it comes to creating the protocols and collecting data and the different sources of data and being transparent in the protocol of how and where you collect those data.
If I can, into the two-part, I would like to share last 6 months journey of how our teams has transformed, maybe more than 6 months. Every couple of months, it reshapes. We continue to deliver more, with the same headcount, if I may. So maybe very relatable example to most of the people here. So when we hire someone, we used to take anywhere between 3 to 6 months of onboarding period, based on their experience. And there used to be a huge burden on seasoned people to train them and like bring them up to speed. And now we have built so many internal GPTs, bots that a new has to like go to, like so they are trained on like SOPs, like our platform and domain experience. So all that is like baked into it. Like, so that was our transformation in last 12 months. So which was easily measurable, like how fast like someone was getting on board their like the broad platform and domain space. Now, how I see the shift further going down the lane, I will add on to the earlier call out. So I see roles merge. None of the roles would completely be eliminated. Like the talent will become denser for some of the roles, and some of the roles will converge where they could be techno-functional or like with more business and analytical skills.
It was well said, and maybe I'll just repeat a trope because I think it's relevant. I think today AI doesn't replace people. People using AI replace people that aren't using AI.
I think that the one thing that everybody in this industry ultimately cares about is getting drugs to people to help them. And with AI, and to what Vish was just saying, you know, to have something that's going to speed that drug development life cycle up to get these drugs to people who need them faster is what everyone who does this actually wants to have happen. So I'll pose the question to each of you here as we move on. What excites you most about what's going to happen in this industry with AI?
Depending on who you ask, it takes $2 to $3 billion to get a drug to market, and 12 plus years. And what excites me is I think this has been a long time coming, but this wave in technology can meaningfully move the needle on discovering new treatments and bring them to patients that desperately need them, and that's what gets me leaping out of bed in the morning.
The only thing I can add to what Vish said is, it reminds me, I think I was at a conference, the keynote speaker was from a company called Everycure. So they basically repurpose drugs that are already approved, but for other indications. And that's been possible because of what AI has, because of AI. So I think we're taking steps in the right direction, and I think in a few years we'll see a monumental change. So I believe the promise is there, and I think that we are doing the groundwork now.
Yeah, a great point, Vish. And so I'll again put an example here. Like the reason we all are here, right? So everyone is talking about it. We all are excited about it. I feel like this is new, at least from my limited experience of a decade within clinical research space. We were typically late to the adopting technology in the past. Now there's just so much excitement from our customers that it excites me that they want to adopt AI. They're seeking solutions for end-to-end digitization. So I think that's the path that we are heading towards, where we would completely digitize the protocol and drive downstream feeds of like data standardization, reporting components, like end-to-end, including insights through AI, which eventually, of course, rolls up into how fast we can deliver the drug to the market.
And I'm excited because up until AI, I feel like clinical research has just been recycled. We'll use EDC and we'll just try risk-based monitoring, not implementing AI, just having a visualization tool. So really the chance to revamp the way that clinical trials are being designed, run, the collection of the data, the meaningfulness of the data, and really having the opportunity to operate under a risk-based approach, a real risk-based approach, meaning you've thought through it, you have the model, you have the justification, and you have the checks in place to operate that way.
Those are great answers. And again, I think everybody in this room probably feels the same way, that ultimately this is about the patients and about getting those drugs to them as quickly as possible so we can help more people. So we know that there are a lot of questions out there, so we're gonna get to those in a minute. We have a closing question here where we just wanna kind of look ahead and ask each of you here on the panel, what's one trend, opportunity, or prediction related to AI in clinical trials that you're gonna be watching the most closely over the next 3 to 5 years?
I'll extend to my last answer. So I expect in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe even sooner, there will be end-to-end digitization of the protocol is for people to relate. And we were doing a pilot with a customer. I see this published at DDF. How do you digitize the data flow? So you could literally use an LLM model to parse a protocol and create review objectives, if I may. So taking making the work of data managers simpler, reviewer simpler. So where we would end up, if I had to summarize in one line, is so all this effort to assemble different components to actually do the meaningful clinical research work would become simpler, so that everyone can focus on actual work.
I think it'll be really interesting to see if AI can change study designs so that it's easier to run trials in rare disease. One particular application I'm interested in is today it's very hard to build studies for ultra rare diseases because of control arms. So can we create control arms with real world data in a way that historically wasn't possible because the data was too messy? And can we now study these diseases and bring treatments to market more quickly because of it?
The only thing I'll add is, the science is always evolving, right? And I think there will be more newer frontiers. A decade ago or even earlier, right? So it used to be more at the macro levels, It's more at the organ level, then you went at the cellular level, then you went at the genomic level. And so I think it's going to open more newer frontiers, if you will.
I agree.
And I just want to add, I am fascinated to see what the FDA does with all of this and how quickly they're able to come out with guidance on what they want to do. We all, see what's going on in the news regularly with Health and Human Services all the way down to the FDA. So I just can't wait to see how they're able to, put some guidance around what is going to be acceptable and what is not going to be acceptable. And Sanjiv, on the programming point, it goes back to how long it took them to put some guidance out there about R, right? Everyone was talking about R, everyone wanted to use R, the open source technology, and they finally put it in there and no one's using it. Pretty much. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think that's going to be the case with AI. So obviously,
actually, there's 2 frameworks, and I'm actually inspired by it. I think so. The FDA came out with the guidance. I think in Jan of 2025,
Yeah.
and then EMA and FDA came out with good clinical practices for AI. I think it was in Jan 2026. 10 guiding principles. I think that's what I was going to go for. I think for anyone starting any organization, I think they're definitely leading the way in that front. So I actually feel inspired by what they're doing.
The other recommendation from the FDA, which I was interested in, is the continuous trial instead of just by phase, a new model of the continuous trial. And in what I understand, I feel that instead of having to finish phase 1 and submit that data, you can just continuously move through the phases in the continuous trial and submit the data. So I'll be interested to find out if that actually takes off.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everybody on this panel. I think this was fantastic, and I know that everybody here in the room probably has some questions. Hannah has a microphone, so if you have some questions for the panel, if you want to just raise your hand, we can get you a microphone, and I know our panel will be excited to answer all the questions.
Hi, how's it going? My name is, this is really loud, I'm sorry. My name is Omkar. I am a student at Purdue University. I've started my own company with my buddies at Cornell and UMich, and we're working on distribution right now. We love the work that you guys are doing in research, but we want to make that accessible to people. And what my question is for you all is, what do you guys see as the biggest gap in distribution right now, especially with the environmental impact that we're seeing with AI use? And what steps do you guys think as researchers should we take to mitigate that environmental impact right now, especially with what we're seeing with data centers going around all over the country and all across the world? What steps can we take right now to mitigate that impact later on in life? Because I know there's things that we can do, the small things that we can do make a difference later on. What are those small things that you think as researchers right now in this field are steps that we should be taking towards that? Just making accessibility.
I'm trying to, so by distribution, you mean?
Yeah, I can further
that
explain.
distribution.
Well, no. So GoodRx is already doing a great job, or a pretty decent job at getting accessibility to patients at a lower rate. What we're trying to do is make medical products in general, so OTC products, like over-the-counter products, to blood transfusion devices. A little bit about my background. I worked in quality for Cogmetics, a medical manufacturer in the local Worcester area. And I saw hands-on working with ISO 13485 protocols and FDA registries, and how much auditing is very, very much the focus right now for a lot of these companies who are doing distribution and manufacturing. Taking that into account, what we're trying to do is just keeping that in account and keeping that visibility to customers and to just a general audience by having all of the information, all of the protocols that the products that are following, just giving that visibility to people. What we're trying to do, again, we're completely bootstrapped right now. We're working out of my buddy's dorm at MIT. But as we're trying to grow, we're trying to get a little bit more understanding on what researchers are doing in this field right now and how they are making conscious efforts to understand the implications of AI in the environmental sense.
Yeah, I'll just say I'm not qualified to answer that question, but I agree with your sentiment that it's not something to be ignored. Yeah, so that's that one side.
This is more a question for Sanjiv and Shelby. How are you convincing your leadership to make AI investments? What are the financial metrics you're tracking? And then for the entire panel, what are the applications of synthetic data that AI can help generate in the healthcare space?
Shall I start? So I'm focusing more on efficiency. So for example, the same with the trial summary. So it saves us a couple of hours every study. So we do average maybe 20, 25 every year. So there we are seeing that return of investment. And then I think then management sees that, yes, this is something worth investing on. But then to also go back, I think you also want to identify the right use case. So you really want to make sure that, yes, you can have, this is a good use case for AI. So you really want to also narrow the scope, right? So the context of use is important. So you need a well-defined input. So here there's two, and then you also want to lower the risk. And that's why you're to say start off small, low risk. That's why then in this example, there's no use of clinical data. But then likewise, sometimes you learn from examples too. So just very recently, we decided to drop a project because the validation there was no human in the loop in that example. And then we felt it's too risky from an audit perspective. Sorry, was there another part to your question? Synthetic data, yes. So I think there's already companies or applications that are there that generate synthetic data. I think it really gives you a head start in terms of the development cycle. So rather than waiting for actual data to come in to start any downstream, then you can really start activities way upstream. So definitely use case, a big use case there from a development perspective.
Hi, my name is Lucinda Lindy, and a lot of the things that you were mentioning were kind of like personal productivity things, like doing a use case, doing a literature search more quickly, or getting a first draft of a paper. Those really are kind of at the personal productivity level. But if you think about clinical trials and processing data and how that goes through, for example, one thing might be to say just like very actively or scalably scanning lots of medical records to be able to figure out which of these 100,000 patients are the ones that you're choosing for your clinical trial. In other words, making it embedded in the process. I haven't heard anything like that. Or is that because it's too risky and there's no guidance, or is it because another reason?
I can speak to this because it's sort of the core of what our platform does. I think that we have to be thoughtful about applying AI on those sort of mission critical tasks versus kind of productivity. And my suggestion would be that painting with too broad a brush, that we can replace data entry into an EDC, for example, risks getting ahead of ourselves and what the technology can do. And kind of it is a journey to go towards adopting these technologies as industry, as vendors, and as regulatory bodies. So I think it's important, as the various voices on this panel here, across sponsors and vendors, to be careful about where can AI actually solve the real problem, which my suggestion would be processing unstructured data initially for observational research, retrospective studies, feasibility analyses is a place to start, and then we keep building from there thoughtfully.
To add to that,
Because I was thinking that it was just more, value add in terms of just something that actually can move the needle, that's worth investing in a process.
Yeah. So, since we're listening to this, so if I pick on a couple of other examples that we have worked on, like so I would put them in like anomalous data detection, fraud detection, like through audit trail data entry. So those are, we have built a couple of models that serve those use cases, which are not necessarily targeted towards productivity, but broader like data analysis.
Thank you. So this particular panel focus a lot on the downstream of how AI impact. I heard a lot, like the two terms, data and AI a lot tonight. So a couple questions I have is, what about the upstream, like in terms of AI's impact to the downstream? Secondly, when you look at the whole whole process from upstream to downstream, you're talking about that gentleman, I don't know your name, you talk about 1 or 2 billion in 12 years, something like that. Which part you think is more impactful as you see? I think the part that you focus on, as I see it, is likely less risky in the sense than the upstream part. Because upstream, in terms of select candidate and eventually whether it become a drug or not, it wait a long time, and likely the money is spent a lot too. But the downstream part, the kind of impact is easier to see. So I just wondering whether you have some comment regarding which part in terms of investment where you see more impactful. There are other questions, but I just leave it here. So thank you.
I'm sure there's some very interesting answers to this on the panel, so I'll just kind of suggest one use case that's more kind of upstream in the target selection kind of domain. We found that drug repurposing or identifying uses of existing drugs off-label is often really difficult to do with the current set of tools. So can we use AI to identify where drugs are currently being used off-label as something that would potentially be a target for a phase 1 or phase 2 trial? So just a specific example of where you can solve things upstream in the drug life cycle, but I'm sure there are other ideas now.
I that to so as when I say upstream, so within my span of work, upstream is protocol definition and digitization of that is where we are trying to use AI
That's not what I mean. Upstream, I'm talking about
Yeah,
maybe
for sure.
candidate identification,
Yeah.
the process of synthesize.
Yeah, well, it's preclinical,
create
yeah.
the data, so that's the upstream. And I think as that part become more productive, likely will also impact quite a lot about what you guys focus
Yeah.
as well.
Fair point, yeah. It may be on my expertise, but yeah, I'm surely there is use cases.
Okay, let's take one more question. We haven't got anybody in the back.
Hi, thank you for the panel. It was very informative. My name is Toby Raji. I'm currently a scientist. I work in R&D vaccines, and I'm also a doctoral student in regulatory and clinical research. So I have a two-part question. So number one, how do you dealing with the team of like quality assurance and quality control? So we're moving very, very fast with AI, and quality assurance is very dependent on the guidance, the FDA guidance, but on the process side and like the digital side, they're moving fast by timelines. So how do you deal with that structure? Because we're moving fast, yes, but also those people are hired to follow guidances, right? And I know we talked about the risk-based approach, so if we can go into more detail about that. And then secondly, I really liked how you touched on inclusion. So how do you think AI and the movement of AI will help improve like diversity and inclusion in clinical trials? I know there is like new guidances on that right now. So that's my take on it. Thank you.
I can maybe start with the second question, because I think it's really important. FDA has various guidances around diversity action plans and ensuring that there's representativeness in clinical trials. What we found is that patient populations that are historically underrepresented in trials, but more broadly in clinical research, they tend to be distributed unevenly across the provider and healthcare delivery ecosystem. So it's often academic settings and more well-resourced trial sites where trials are run, sort of by definition, right? The infrastructure is there, the relationships are there, but it's often kind of community centers, specialty providers that are outside of kind of urban areas where you can really solve for lack of representativeness in trials, but the infrastructure hasn't been there historically. So when we're talking about, frankly, sometimes like mundane use cases, like can you read unstructured data? But that really solves some of the structural issues. So now instead of needing large teams of, CRCs or other kind of other types of infrastructure, can you have an AI do that kind of work and therefore increase the footprint for clinical trials where historically it wasn't feasible?
I can just a quality question. So we deliver a number of AI solutions to our customers. So the common question is around like discussion with their quality team. So we take like few key evidences to the table, explaining how we have done the ground truth labeling and evidence based on that, and also all the AI-driven insights are go through a typical pilot post and followed by validation, and that seemed to have satisfied most of the sponsors' quality teams so far, and we continue to take the same path.
Those are great questions. Thank you, everybody, for asking questions and for being here tonight, and to our panel, to Vish and to Sanjiv and Sreekanth and Shelby. Thank you guys so much for being with us, and we have some time for some networking, so feel free to stick around. And thank you.